hear you. Well, now.
Can you hear me now? Yes. That is, if you want to hear me, if not, then you. I was saying that I met this man about 45 years or so ago. And it's been the longest running friendship I've had, because there has been no time in which I have not known where you are. I mean, time passes fast, and we don't necessarily are talking every week. It may even be months. But I've always felt that he is nearby. And I have never, however, explored this friendship from any other perspective than just enjoying it. So to preparing these questions that I'm going to ask has been an exploration on myself as to what it is that has attracted me so much to sustain this this friendship for so long. Part of it is wild and crazy stuff. Like, for example, this man sitting in here, first of all, we got to find a quote or something for the Pope, because in case, he's one of the 8, and we may close the whole show down. And we shall use this thing of the Pope that we should leave the center and go to the periphery now and then, in order to experience what people are experiencing and bring to them the gospel as the center of their lives. The periphery, the Pope uses a language we haven't used in the United States, because periphery for him means what we call the inner city. That is to say, it's a totally reverse direction. In Europe, as you know, the poor move to the periphery, outside, and those with money and status move to the center of the cities. Here it was the other way around. The poor took over the center, put it that way, and the people with resources, the periphery. So when I say the periphery, I mean what we mean by inner city. And this is where this man flourished, in the inner city. But he just as equally flourished in the periphery and in the center, and everywhere we went. It is as if he always belonged to where we were. And I felt no conflict between these two. For example, this man says it here, and at one time or another, or so it is said, he owned, or maybe, as far as I know, he still owns, a high-rise building in the inner periphery of Washington, D.C., which cost him, it's either, some versions say 1 cent, other versions say $1. He also, at one time, owned or borrowed or stole, for all I know, I don't know how many homes named after Franciscan saints, in which he would hide people looked for by the police. I mean, what's going on? Because all of this was perfectly harmonious with his Franciscan vocation, his ministry, his sacramental ministry. Most of us priests went through very difficult times trying to combine the two. That is the sacramental aspect of our vocation, to hear confession, say the Mass, etc., as well as the help for the poor. He had no such trouble. So let's find out, before we try to deal with that question, which I think is the most important one facing the church today. I repeat it again. I think this question is the most important one facing the church today. Let's find out about that one, the true story of the $1 building and the 8 houses.
Well, Thank you, Lorenzo. Of course, as Monsignor said, that we have been friends for over 45 years, and that friendship has been a great treasure for me, and Lorenzo is a gift of the church. His brilliance and his zany sense of humor is something that we all enjoy very, very much. It was my...
See, if he says these things, that's why I continue being his friend.
I knew Lorenzo before he went into the seminary, and I was a young brother. It was before I was ordained a priest. I was a Capuchin brother in Washington studying the seminary, and as a matter of fact, it was my privilege to preach at his first Mass, Harto difícil resulta para mí, and afterwards, his mother, Doña Conchita, had a lovely reception in their home for him, and she had just moved into this new apartment, and so when we got there after the first Mass, she said, "Oh, Padre Sean, will you bless my new apartment?" And I said, "But Doña Conchita, your son was just ordained." She said, "Yes, but I think he's joking."
She never really believed I was validly ordained. In fact, on one occasion, using suspicious Vatican contacts, she and my brother and myself were flying from Milan to Lisbon. And they are terrified of airplanes. But a friend in the Vatican, who later on ended in disgrace, he arranged it for us to go first class, to get into the plane before everybody else, to make it as kindly pleasant as possible. Anyway, so we were there, myself, my mother, and my brother, and suddenly the normal passengers came, and there was a whole group of pilgrimage to Vatican. And my mother said suddenly aloud, "Oh, look, there are 2 or 3 priests with that group. Nothing bad will happen." The flight attendant was standing there, looked at me like, "Who are you?" So she never really, I had forgotten about the house.
Well, that's where Lorenzo got his sense of humor. His mother was a very charming and witty person as well. But I think I have to clarify that I never actually owned any property. I am a Capuchin friar. But we did have a building that where we rented the first floor. It was a tenement building in Washington where we had the Centro Católico offices and our clinics, and it was a building that was in very bad shape. And at one point, the owner decided that he was going to sell the building and evict everybody there. So we started a cooperative. And what the person didn't realize who tried to sell the building, that in Washington, there's laws that tenants have the first right of refusal. And because they neglected to offer us the building, then there was some leverage for us to acquire this building, and we started this tenants cooperative. And in the building there was a lot of violence, though, and people, most of the people were armed to the teeth, and there were gun fights going on all the time. So at the first meeting of the cooperative, which I held in the lobby, they elected me the president of this cooperative. So I put a card table in the center of the room, and I asked everyone to put their guns on that card table, because the police in Washington had a buyback, you know, and I was going to, I said, "We'll get you money for this." I said, "But I'm terribly worried that some children are going to get killed because there were gunfights going on, and there was sort of silence after I made this petition, and then this little old grandmother opened up her purse and she took out a pistol like Wyatt Earp. It's this big. And she waved it under my nose. And she said, "Father, you're a priest. No one's going to do anything to you. Me, I'm keeping my gun."
She was an agent of the NAR.
Not really, but it took us a while to disarm the people there. But
well, you know, in itself, it's funny that you would be, because during all this time, he's wearing what he's wearing now. I mean, there's this Franciscan habit in the midst, surrounded by guns.
That's what kept me from getting shot.
and things, well, anyway.
But as far as the houses,
yes, let's hear about that one.
First, I do want to say this, that for years and years, all of Lorenzo's friends, we've always said that we wanted him to have something like the Jack Parr show, which today would be like Jay Leno or something like that, where he could do these interviews. But I always imagined he'd be interviewing, you know, Dick Cheney and Zsa Zsa Gabor and people like that. I didn't realize I was going to be his victim. I would never have...
it's come down to this.
He said this is as close to Broadway as we'll ever get. So
well, I mean, there's even a name for our group, which I wasn't going to say. You see, it's very difficult. This is a very difficult thing for me. Because I am awed in the best sense of the word, that is before something that is from beyond, from the mystery that shines through him. Again, I'm not saying that he is the author of it, on the very contrary. But that he is there's a transparency, there is something that I respect a lot. Second, at the human level, it's been wonderful, and it's great to have a real friend like this. But third, part of it is the funny things that happen. And he is a very funny man. And that usually doesn't come together with the rest. Like, we appear before you as the closest to Broadway appearance of the group called the Two Bums. A name that he gave to our friendship himself. Why don't you explain to the people why we are the Two Bums?
Lorenzo.
It's true,
yes.
The shrimp.
Well, we were invited to preside at the wedding. I don't remember whether Lorenzo preached or I preached and what the other person received the vows. It was a very wonderful couple, and they had the wedding at West Point. It was a very fancy place and this great reception. And at the reception, the amounts of shrimp that were consumed by the two clerics there, it's very large. And then Lorenzo says, well, let's go to a bookstore. I said, if we leave now, they'll say those two bums ate all the shrimp and left. But we went to the bookstore anyway.
They didn't even notice we were gone. But then, all of that was in preparation for the big encounter with the poor. And it was the lady who asked you for money.
Yes, she said it behooves you to give me $10.
I mean,
we were very impressed that she would use, that's almost, you know, like the Latin forms, oportet nos, dare.
So the two bums appear before you. You're all very privileged to see the eye. Now,
Lorenzo, let me say a little bit about the Centro Católico. So that
oh, yes.
you know, And I often share this story with people because it gives a sense of what I experienced there, going there as a young priest. When I joined the order, I thought I was going to go to the missions, and actually I was told my first assignment was going to be in Easter Island. So I was learning Rapa Nui, the Indian language there, when Cardinal O'Malley, who was our bishop at the time, went to the provincial and said, "Oh, you have a deacon that speaks Spanish. I need him here in Washington." So my whole life was changed overnight because of that. I became the director of the Spanish Catholic Center in my first week there, working with the immigrants. And the wars were going on in Central America, in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and thousands of refugees were crossing the border, and many people were coming to Washington. In Latin America, in many countries, the capital is the largest and the most important city. So a lot of people, when they think of coming to the United States, they think of coming to Washington, particularly from the countries in Central America. And they were crossing the border illegally. There were smugglers called coyotes that would bring them to Washington on a go now, pay later kind of arrangement. But my very first week there, a man came into the Centro Católico, and he was very upset. He was crying so hard he couldn't even talk, and he gave me a letter to read. It was from his wife, and in the letter she castigates him. She said, "You know, you abandoned me and our 6 children, and we're starving, and you said you were going to go to Washington and get a job and send us money." And he explained to me, he was a farmer in El Salvador, and because of the war, it was impossible to be able to conduct his business. And so, like many other men in his village, he came to Washington principally to work in restaurants. And the Salvadorans were often working as dishwashers, and they referred to that as grabando discos, you know, making records, you know. But this man said to me, said, "Father, I live in a room, several other men. We all came here to be able to support our families. I work in 2 restaurants washing dishes. I walk to work so as not to spend any money on transportation. I eat the leftovers from the dirty dishes so that I don't have to spend any money for food, so that all of my money I can send back to my family in El Salvador. And every week, all the money that I could earn, I would put in an envelope and put it in that blue mailbox in the corner and send it to my family." So I questioned him, and I said, "You know, do you send a check or a money order?" And he said, "No, Father, I always send cash." And then I looked out the window and saw the blue mailbox, which was actually just a very fancy trash bin. And here, for almost a year, this man, working so hard and worrying about his family, was throwing all of his money away. And it brought home to me how difficult it is to be an immigrant and not to know the language, and oftentimes not to have documents, and to live in that fear, to not to know the culture where everything is strange. And that's the population that we were working with. And you know, recently in all the newspapers here in New York, there's been a lot of publicity about an Indian diplomat who was arrested and, unfortunately, I think, mistreated. I think a strip search for a woman like that is outrageous. But the problem that it underscores is something that we lived with in Washington, where there were so many embassies to the White House, so many embassies to the Organization of American States, many international organizations, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Inter-American Defense Board, and all of these organizations have diplomatic status, and their workers were entitled to bring household workers with them and extend visas to them. And there was a lot of abuse in that kind of a situation where people brought women from their countries to work as servants in their home. And in the Centro Católico, every week we would have problems arising around this. One young woman who was brought to be an au pair, to take care of the children, she thought. She was about 17 or 18. She came with this family, and when she got here, she discovered, well, she wasn't only taking care of the 4 or 5 children, but she was also to wash the clothes, to cook, to clean the house, to cut the grass, shine the man's shoes. And this was 7 days a week, and at the end of every month, she would get a receipt saying, well, we're charging you so much for your room and board, your toothpaste, your transportation. And at the end of 3 years, they had not paid her anything. But luckily, she'd saved all of those receipts. So when she came to the Centro Católico, I found the meanest Cuban lawyer that we could, and we sued that family. And he came to us.
Who else would know the meanest Cuban lawyer?
So we sued this family, and he came to me and he said, well, they're offering $20,000 because you know they're diplomats, they're immune, so you better take it. So we did. But every week there were these problems, and so often the diplomats would take the passport away from the woman to make sure that she wouldn't try and leave or change jobs, and so we did it. We had these houses that some people call safe houses, where if women needed to leave one of these very difficult situations, we would have a place for them to stay. We had wonderful Spanish nuns working with us, the sisters, Carmelite Sisters of Vedruna, who ran many of those houses for us, and we started a group for the women, sort of a union for domestic workers. We called them the International Association of Household Technicians. And strangely enough, I shouldn't say they'll scandalize you all, but at the time, our mayor was Marion Barry. And
a poor honest man.
Well,
the meanest in town.
He was the one who said, the witch made me do it, but he didn't say witch.
No, that's right.
And all the kids were wearing that on their t-shirt when he was arrested. But anyway, he appointed me and Gloria Steinem to co-chair a committee to set the minimum wage for household workers. And that was a very interesting experience. But we managed to set a wage that was much higher than the regular minimum wage. However, the problems with the diplomats continued. So when I saw this recent dust-up, it was sort of a consolation to me, because in the years when I was in Washington, we could never get our authorities to do anything about these situations. Even they would always say, well, they have diplomatic immunity and there's nothing that we can do. But to me, it was very significant that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, as his very first outing, his very first trip, was to Lampedusa, which is an island off the coast of Italy where many illegal aliens, as we used to call them here in the United States, undocumented workers, try to get a beachhead to get into Italy and into Europe. And the Holy Father went there realizing just how much suffering those people experience. And I was very moved by the homily that he gave and his remarks. He also threw a wreath into the water where thousands and thousands of immigrants have drowned in their attempts to reach this island of Lampedusa. In the United States, right now, there's a lot of talk about immigration reform, and there's so much resistance to that. And the bishops have been very clear in trying to advocate for a more just system and more just laws. Right now we have so many workers here, millions of people who are in our country, and many of them being exploited, many of them having to live lives of fear and under the radar. And so when we talk about people on the margins and the peripheries in our own country, certainly the undocumented workers that are here and in large numbers are a very important demographic for the church, and many of them are Catholics, and so we are very concerned about their fate. And at the Centro Católico, most of the people that we serve were in that situation, and as I say, in my 20 years in Washington, I came to realize the great suffering of these immigrants and their great generosity. In many of the countries in Central America, the largest portion of the gross national product is actually the money that is being sent back from people washing dishes in Washington and working as maids and parking cars in garages and living very, very sacrificial lives to be able to support relatives and friends back in their own country.
There are a few things. A superficial thing, which is just a little anecdote. The founder with whom I worked of the John Paul II Institute in Rome, his name is Carlo Caffarra, and today he is a cardinal too. All these people became cardinals. I became an altar boy or something. In any case, Carlo Caffarra is the Archbishop of Bologna these days. But at that time, he was the founder of the Institute, and he would come to Washington periodically to visit us, to give us a talk, maybe to give a mini little course. And I was hanging around with His Eminence here, and so they met, and we decided to go out. I can't remember, it was a steakhouse.
The Sizzler.
The Sizzler, yes. Caffarra used to call it Los Sizzler. Anyway, we went there, and when we entered, the entire kitchen, cleaning floor, the whole mob of people saw him and cast themselves at his feet, holding on to his habit, and saying things like, "Oh, consoler of the afflicted." Caffarra looked at him and said, it's the litany of the Holy Spirit. Well, even this meeting that we're having is now known to Caffarra, because there is this man among you who came to me a few years ago and told me he was from Bologna. I told him to go and tell Caffarra that he had seen me and that what we were doing, and that I'd keep in touch with him. So now, just yesterday, he told me he had gone to see him and had told him about this meeting, and Caffarra had laughed and said, you know, give my regards to him and to Cardinal O'Malley. So, but anyway, that's unimportant. That's an anecdote, but an anecdote that has a base not on superficial emotion. Because I repeat again, while all of this is happening and we are either crying or laughing or whatever, there is something else there. I see a picture. I see when I went to visit you one afternoon at the Centro Católico, you were in some kind of argument with the government official, and suddenly one of the ladies who worked there came and gave you a piece of paper, and you left the room. and you went to hear a confession. Just like, you know, like, well, whatever. Anyway, and then you came back and continued the argument with the man. And there was absolutely no change. It seemed like he was responding to the same reality when he was arguing with this guy as when he was just plainly hearing an old-fashioned confession. And that said something to me. In fact, it still does. Because it's, I feel a conflict many times between works of justice that I feel have to be done and my vocation, my sacramental vocation. Could you really say, I don't know whether you want to say anything.
You know, I think that's, you have an interesting point there, and as I say, because in the Centro Católico, most of the people that we were serving were not documented. We weren't in partnership with the government at all. It was an entirely church-sponsored agency, and so often now in the United States, where we have this tradition of partnership between the non-profit and the government section, and it often puts the church in a position where we're involved in, you know, very good social ministry and social services, but separate from the pastoral services, whereas in the Centro Católico, the two were what we were there for, to serve the whole person. Pope Francis is often saying, you know, that the poor are not just underserved in the area of social services, but they're underserved pastorally. And this is a big challenge for the church. And we were trying there, and I think with some success, to be able to serve people's spiritual needs as well as their physical needs. And I mean, we would have classes for English classes, GED, literacy. But when we had a retreat or a day of recollection, we would invite all of those people in the classes to attend retreats. And
I remember they gave you money, the government would give you money to take care of young people during the summer so that they're not running around when school is out and everything. And you used to do it at Catholic U at the shrine. Something was going on. And I saw you there surrounded by hundreds of kids and everything. And you were on a procession of some kind or other with some saint. And I said to you, what are you doing? You said, well, you know, the district summer program for children. And I said, with processions and all that? He said, well, they don't know. He took their money and then they took. Now,
you're going to get me in trouble, Lorenzo.
Not anymore.
They'll be waiting to arrest me.
No, then you can visit the jail. No, but please, what I want to say, that I can say it even now, I just thought about it. The question to me, and maybe I'm wrong, is not that this is this or that. It is not even this and that. There's only one. It's the same. Your commitment to, one's commitment to the poor, to the social justice, is as much part, I mean, we have been hearing nothing but this for years, of evangelization, as the sacramental ministry. I think there is the poverty of which the Holy Father speaks, is that one that is all-encompassing, is the poverty of our own selves without God and therefore without Christ. The commitment to live this, I believe, is what he means by the church of the poor. The church is poor by nature. This is what I want to say. So when you see him next time, tell him that I say that he should introduce a subject like salvific poverty.
I'll take a note. Well, the Holy Father's notion of the culture of encounter, I think, is something that is so beautiful. And in his Evangelii Gaudium, he talks of that reverence for the other, and almost like being in the presence of the burning bush, the realization of how precious every human being is. And certainly the Holy Father's message has touched the hearts of everyone. It's amazing, and it's so basic in what he's just reminding us what the gospel is about, of love and service and reconciliation, and so the Church's mission is something that all of us are called to become involved in, and it's so different from the individualism of our culture that has resulted in this sort of New Age spirituality, Jesus and me, or, you know, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. I mean, the Holy Father's approach completely blows that to smithereens. You know, you can't be a disciple on a solo flight. You're part of this community and part of God's family, and we have responsibilities to each other, and those who are suffering and those who are poor have a very special claim on our love. I always tell the story that here in New York once, Cardinal Spellman was in his office and the intercom rang, and it was the new secretary, the new receptionist in the chancery, in the lobby, and she said in sort of a whisper, "Your Eminence, there's a man in the lobby who says he's Jesus Christ. What should I do?" And the Cardinal said, "Look busy."
So true.
But of course, what the Cardinal said so glibly is true, because that homeless, office-mad, schizophrenic man who thinks he's Jesus Christ is Jesus Christ, as Mother Teresa used to say, in a distressing disguise. And, you know, I was privileged to be able to go with the Holy Father to Assisi on the feast of St. Francis. And it was just an extraordinary experience.
I'm sure very different from when we went together.
But actually it was a helicopter ride, which brings up another story. My first helicopter ride was with Lorenzo in the Dominican Republic. And Lorenzo taps me on the shoulder and says, "We're running out of fuel." And of course we thought this is one of the Albacete jokes. But this was Albacete, the aeronautical engineer, speaking. And when the pilot realized we had to make an emergency landing in this field,
Cardinal
Baum was with us, and these very lovely campesinos came out and gave us coffee.
But it was fun too.
But let me tell them about Assisi. When we arrived in Assisi in a helicopter, military helicopters, the Holy Father's first stop was to the Istituto Serafico, which is an institution in Assisi run by the Church that takes care of severely handicapped children. And to me it was just an ingenious way to begin this Franciscan pilgrimage, because St. Francis's own conversion that he describes when he writes his last testament takes place in an encounter that he has with a leper. Because St. Francis had this phobia of leprosy, that whenever he saw a leper, he would run in the other direction. But this one day, he encounters a leper, and God's grace touches his heart, and he gets off his horse, he goes over to the leper, he gives him all of his money, gives him his clothes, and he kisses the leper. And for the rest of his life, he said, that was the moment when my life was changed, when everything that had been bitter before that is changed into sweetness. And so for the Holy Father to begin his Franciscan pilgrimage by this encounter with suffering humanity, I thought was such a beautiful gesture. And he kissed every child, he spoke to every parent and every caregiver. And then when he talked about his comments, he talked about how the risen Lord, when he appears and shows his wounds, that the risen Lord is still the wounded Christ. And although, you know, the other aspects of the Passion disappear, but the wounds are still there. And then he said, in the Ascension, Christ takes those wounds with him to heaven. And he said, now these children here are those wounds on the body of Christ. And those wounds that Christ is going to take to heaven. And we have the opportunity to worship the wounded Christ in their suffering.
What I want to say is that those very words are not a metaphor. These poor people are not Christ metaphorically. Do it in the name of Christ. Do it remembering how Christ walked. They are, in some way, they are the real Christ. There's no other one. They are his body now. Otherwise, there has been a disincarnation. This is the point that I've seen in him that's been so magnificent, and because people take it in a sentimental way. So a lot of its popularity is due to sentimental things, you know, like, oh, what do you expect it to come out and say, let's be cruel this year to people? I mean, it would be fun anyway, to just say I was kidding after. Now, okay, so that's what I want to say. Another thing I want to say, because you know, we will run out of time, about your vocation, which we have heard now, and earlier before when you went over the various places where you have served. If there is anything that has been characteristic of it, is how surprising it's made up of surprising changes. All you have to do to make sure you're not going to be doing something is want to do it. I mean, you know, you go to this, but no, you're sent to this other place. When we finally had a whole working, more or less, system of the care of the Hispanics in Washington, you ended up in the Virgin Islands. I mean, where I had to come and help you because you kept driving over people's feet. Remember that? In any case, and then there he is, which is fine because they gave you an excuse to go to the Virgin Islands. And there he was, having to relearn another culture, because no matter how close they are to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, they're different cultures. The Latin culture.
Can I tell them a story?
You could tell them a story, yes.
When I first arrived in the Virgin Islands, and I was very nervous because to go from one island to the other, I had to go in these seaplanes. And I was just dreading going on these seaplanes. So I went down to the harbor, and we were lined up to get on the seaplane. And in front of me was a very large, full-figured West Indian woman. And the pilot got off, and he had a little pad of paper, and he said, "Miss, how much do you weigh?" And of course, everyone was listening very carefully. She said, "Oh, 80 pounds. They said, "Bishop, how much do you weigh?" I said, 300. But it was a great experience in the Virgin Islands.
But it was because it was not only a change of diocese, but you were not a bishop until you went to the Virgin Islands.
That's right.
I remember one of the things, I'll never forget this. I'll even tell you. Told you before. I, of course, did not celebrate the Mass with installation, because I would rather walk around the street and take pictures and film a movie camera that I had just got. And because these things make me nervous. Anyway, but I was walking through some place in the building, and you were vesting. The door was somewhat open, and I could see you putting on bishop-type robes and being very uncomfortable with them at the beginning. But I saw, you know, something that I can't explain even now, that I only saw again in anyone else the day you were installed Archbishop of Boston. And that is the combination between a cross and the consolation of having Christ touch you, even if it hurts. To me, so many times that those two pictures have, for the moment, brought me the peace I've been looking for. And so the Virgin Islands was a very important. Thank God for that for me. In any case, was the Virgin Island appointment not due to the Argentinian military or something like that? Does the Pope know this? Does he know that you're being looked? That the Argentinian military has targeted you for some kind of... You don't want to say anything. All right.
He's telling all of my secrets. I mean, I'm going to have to go into the witness protection program. This is all over.
No, well, this is the last funny thing.
We were in St. Matthew's Cathedral, and the Capilla Latina was a chapel of the cathedral. I worked at the cathedral for many years with the Spanish-speaking population there, and Lorenzo was a member of that parish for a while. But he's referring to a Mass that we had for the Argentine Independence Day, and it was right in the midst of what is called the Dirty War, the military dictatorship there that was in conflict with a leftist guerrilla group, but in their fight against the guerrillas, they were killing anyone who criticized the government. And there were 4 French nuns, a member of my community, many Passionist fathers who were murdered, and the Holy Father made a statement about it, talking about the dangers of this ideology of a national security doctrine, as it was called. And so when I was invited to celebrate this Mass for the Argentine Independence Day, it would have been very difficult not to reference what was happening in the country. So, of course, in my homily, began to quote extensively from the Holy Father's reflections on Argentina. And in the congregation, there were scores of Argentine military. And this one general got up and said, "Fuera," and everybody ran to the doors. There were about 700, 800 people leaving the church at the same time during the homily. So I always tell my priest, if you see your congregation yawning during the homily, that's not the worst thing that can happen. They may actually get up and run to the door. But of course I was, a young priest, I was very worried about what was going to be the consequences of this
We all
scandal.
avoided it for a few weeks just in case.
But anyway, and I was also concerned about the Archbishop. I didn't want to embarrass him, but Cardinal Baum, when he was told what happened, he instructed Msgr Quinn, who was the rector of the cathedral. He said, well, whenever Father Sean preaches, make sure that the collection is taken up before the gospel.
Now, All right, I won't go down that way. We have to be closing the show. Next subject. In any case, a lot of this running around was understood by many people, at least its last few assignments, as related to the crisis in the church about the sexual abuse of minors. I remember you were changed from the Virgin Island to Fall River. And I remember going to your inauguration with Carl Anderson. The man now is presiding over billions and doesn't even give you 10 cents.
That's not true.
Anyway. And we drove over to Fall River. And I just sat among the priests of the diocese. And you've never seen more demoralized people. And outside, the whole media was there. I mean, RAI, it's not just local media. It was an international thing because the diocese was almost, I think, in as bad a shape that way as Boston was to be down the line. In any case, when you began and spoke in about 93 languages, you know, everybody was just stunned. Like something had happened. And I remember feeling the same way. I said, you know, this is not just, you know, another incident in the life of the two bombs. I mean, like, I'm seeing something. Okay, over there you took over, and the problem is not solved, but at least you were able to change the vision of most of the Catholics to a new possibility, a new spring for the church, by means of endless processions that used to have of every saint that ever lived, every title of the Blessed Virgin. You would go to see where he's out on a procession. Well, it worked, and people were overwhelmed and happy, and Catholicism was being reborn. But then suddenly that ends, and he goes down to West Palm Beach for another scandal now concerning the bishop himself. And you see these two things running now, an attack on the episcopal ministry by a force that seeks to tear the church down at that level, as well as, on the other side, this new church that was being reborn by means of what you were doing. So when you went to Boston, and I remember you entering the cathedral, I thought, you know, my God, how does he do it? Look at it, outside there was already a demonstration, two demonstrations from both sides, because you had not done enough, or not because you had done too much. And already, and I said, how can you do anything like this? How can you even preach the gospel? But then when he went over, his homily began, he began with a phrase that was mentioned tonight, but it would take too long for you to explain, which was something, the only other person in that entire building that could have recognized that phrase was me. And I felt so moved that you would even remember that I yelled. I said, "Oh!" And the priest next to me was astounded, and I said, "Never mind." In any case, it was about 10 minutes into the homily before you said your first English word. You dug out every language on the surface of the earth and greeted everybody and announced. I finally overheard one of the newsmen who was standing by say, "You know, a new church has been born now. It's not the same." It is one. Tell us something about this persistent, still though, scandal, the effects of the pedophilia scandal. I think we would be wrong in ignoring that question, because it's been such an important part of your life.
Well, in 3 of the 4 dioceses where I have served, it has been a very important part of the ministry that the church has called me to. And and one of healing. And it's not been easy, but the Catholic people, I believe, have rallied around their priest and have come to realize the evil and the damage that sexual abuse of children visits upon families and communities. And unfortunately, I think the focus is sometimes so much on the church that people lose sight of the fact that this is a human problem, and it exists outside of the church in a way that's much more rampant. But when it involves the church, the betrayal and the damage is magnified, and so it is a very a deep wound on the body of Christ, and one that requires a sense of conversion and of repentance for the whole community. And it is encouraging to see that the seriousness with which the church has taken this problem seems to be helping. The incidence of sexual abuse in church parishes and agencies is been greatly diminished, and but it has caused terrible harm and scandal. And at the same time, whenever the church is faced by these kinds of challenges, our God can bring good out of evil, and we see how many people have rallied to support the church. And when I arrived in Boston, and we had, I think, 15 seminarians, and the priests were telling me, oh, you have to close the seminary. I said, no, we have to keep the seminary open, and we have to, invite young men to embrace a vocation. And today we have a terrible problem in Boston. The seminary's filled. We have to build more rooms up to it. And that's because these young men are against the protests of their friends and their families sometimes, are embracing a vocation because they want to help their church. They want to be at the service of God's people, and are not frightened off by our humanity or our sins or our failings, but want to be a part of the new evangelization. And it is, it's a very moving experience to see how God's grace works in the church. And I'm very edified by the faith of our people, their generosity, and the desire to make the Lord's kingdom more visible in our midst.
And one brief word about another subject that comes up when one mentions you, especially among the circles of conservative Catholic, and that is your decision to allow the burial of Ted Kennedy and to be at it has been criticized as a diminishment on your part of the urgency to protest the abortion support by Catholic politicians.
Well, in the case of Senator Kennedy, the position of the church was, I think, has been very clear and has not been diminished. But the church's mission is also to bury the dead, and the burial is not just for the individual, but also for their family and the community. And so, to me, it was a logical thing to be there. This is a man whose family has made great sacrifices for our country. Two of his brothers were assassinated in serving our country. One of his brothers was the very first Catholic president of the United States. So I think that to be present at a person's funeral is not necessarily an endorsement of all of their positions, but a recognition of their humanity and of our need to pray for our dead. And
well, that's enough. No. I mean, that's enough. I don't want to end on that note. I think the two bombs have done not too bad for our first Broadway appearance. And the nuncio was just here, and we conveyed to him the request that he conveyed to the Holy Father, our total devotion and obedience and joy at having him with us. And I'm sure he will. In any case, it's his job. But you, it's not your job. You are going to be seeing him in another context. So we're going to dare ask you to please mention to him that he has here people who want to be with him and who are excited and who are determined to follow his steps and the direction in which he wants to take the church. We are together with him in that. Please tell him that, okay?
I shall be very happy to. I'll be happy to tell him that the joy of the gospel is very much alive in New York and in CL.
That's it.
And he'll be so glad to hear that.
All right, I don't know whether we have closing music or what's going on.